Hello, this is Elijah McCoy, and this is my Project 3 for Sociology 151. We will be discussing reparations for Black Americans in America, as well as compared to reparations for other oppressed groups, other victims of genocide and hate, that being that of the Japanese who were victims of the internment camps in America, the Jewish who were given reparations for the Holocaust, the atrocity of the Holocaust, as well as the Native Americans who received reparations for the genocide and hate acts of the Trail of Tears and the movement of the Indians or the Native Americans, I apologize, from their natural territories. Even though that is not effective, this being the reparations for Native Americans, even though it is terrible and it's not effective whatsoever, they're still within the grander scheme of a white supremacist society. There is still a level of recognition that those heinous atrocities were wrong. It was wrong for the dominant group to do that. There's a level of open mindedness, empathy, acknowledgments even that comes with the atrocities of like the Trail of Tears. The critics of white supremacy within these articles argue that Black Americans are the only group in America that were victims of an atrocity that were not given any reward or any level of atonement for what happened to their predecessors. Within the white dominant society, there is a disrespect to American slavery because we have come so far, but the dominant society doesn't understand how trauma is passed down, as well as how the policies of slavery are still very, very active within our everyday lives. One of the biggest arguments for opposers of reparations, particularly reparations for the descendants of Black Americans, is that just like we are the descendants of American slaves, they are descendants of the exploiters. They were not there, they did not take action, and they should not be held responsible for the atrocities of their forefathers. Not understanding that most policy in America was built to benefit white people, was built to benefit a dominant patriarchal capitalistic society, the middle class everyday white. So just like American slaves were exploited and taken advantage of 150 to 200 years ago, those same principles and policies are interwoven throughout our society now and give white people opportunities to create wealth, much more success with networking, being around professionals, and essentially catering to the dominant perspective of white society. Not only are white high school dropouts more likely to get a job than college graduates, but their families own up to 7 times more wealth than educated Black families. These are all effects of American slavery. So for the dominant white society to not respect how our lives are affected by our descendants is irresponsible as well as disrespectful. And that's why there's so much controversy when it comes to the conversation of reparations. Reparations would be a effective way to help decrease the wealth gap, but in the eyes of the white supremacists, this would take power away from white capitalists and put that power into the hands of who was never supposed to have a chance within this society. Cash paid reparations is only one piece of the pie. In my opinion, cash paid reparations is the least effective of the necessary reparation avenues that we need within America. Essentially, giving a group of people money that was produced by the oppressor, you're still essentially putting a glass ceiling onto the financial potential of a community in America. If reparations, just cash reparations, were given to Americans, not only will taxes go up for all, but prices of all types, prices of different luxuries, as well as just necessary goods, would increase, and Black Americans with just cash reparations would not, that solely would not be able to even put a dent within the wealth gap. That is just, like I said before, that's just one piece, but there would have to be other institutional changes if cash reparations, for cash reparations to be as effective as it could possibly be. For instance, we've already established that most policy was created through the eyes of the white supremacists to keep particular groups within oppressed positions. Until we are able to change the perceptions that the dominant society holds on a particular group of people, there will be no form of reparations that would ever put the Black man on the same socioeconomic level as the white man. At the end of the day, there needs to be an understanding between both groups of people. There needs to be a level of respect between the cultures of both groups of people. There needs to be a level of understanding from the experiences of both groups of people. You can't just give people cash reparations within a racist society and think that all of the intangibles that put that particular group of people in that position in the first place are going to eclipse, or are not going to eclipse, that money. The institutions and the perceptions came before the Western capital being the moolah, the money. So with that being said, I would like to speak on a few different ways that, or a few different modes of reparations, excuse me, could be implemented to not only deconstruct capitalism, but lessen the wealth gap, as well as the social and psychological divide between Black people and white people. That would come with atonement. Apologies need to happen. Families who are still benefiting from the exploitations of American slaves need to admit what their ancestors have done, and they need to shame them. All slave owners on the dollar bill need to be taken off of the dollar bill. Anything that's reminiscent or glorifying that of American slavery needs to be destroyed. There's a whole school called Charles E. Lee School in Miami, Florida, that simply should not be allowed to exist if we're ever going to have a conversation about reparations. There needs to be genuine institutional shifts. And outside of money, other effective ways that reparations could help and alleviate the socioeconomic gap between Blacks and whites could be that of free education all the way to a doctorate degree, business loans. I'm a firm believer in no taxes for Blacks, that are the descendants of slaves. All of these different networks would create professionals as well as give young black kids or just black communities as a whole more opportunities to create healthy money, as well as this institutional change would benefit the economy. We would have more doctors, we would have more lawyers, we would have more professionals. Black people would actually have a chance, communal, institutionally and communal speaking. For every black individual who is successful, there are 100 more who were never given the opportunity because of racist policies such as redlining. Reparations would essentially save lives if used responsibly. One another big opposing argument about reparations is the fact that, at least cash paid reparations, is the fact that people are afraid that individuals would use this money irresponsibly. The thing is, of course, some people would use this money irresponsibly, but the atonement of the genocide that their predecessors went through, because of that, what these people decide to spend their money on is honestly none of those critics' business. You were not in the position of the descendants of these slaves, and that is what a lot of supporters of reparations argue. At the end of the day, me personally, I know individuals within impoverished areas who have no parents, no guidance, who are never presented healthy options, networks, the ambition to continue their education, no money, can't even find a birth certificate. It's easier for them to get a gun than it is for them to get a high school diploma. With cash paid reparations, with free education, with the alleviation of anxiety for a person knowing that they would not have to pay for school because they don't have affluent parents who may do so, could be an effective way to create opportunities for people who never had them. Regarding reparations, it gets really tricky because not all Black Americans are are descendants of the transatlantic slaves. We have plenty of immigrants who came over to America later in the 1900s, maybe even within the 50s and the 60s. They deserve reparations as well. Supporters of reparations argue that policies such as housing covenants, redlining, that stopped blacks from being able to get jobs, pursue their education, and live within unhealthy areas are due reparations as well. Essentially, any racist policy that has handicapped a minority group of people from establishing wealth, from developing healthy mental health, they deserve some way to build wealth. Wealth has been statistically proven to increase one's mood, to increase one's ambition, as well as your physiological health. So not only are blacks in America dealing with higher levels of stress because of their impoverished reality, but they develop racial trauma, depression, PTSD, anxiety, because they're not presented with particular opportunities as their white counterparts. Reparations, particularly cash paid reparations, would help alleviate the stress that Black Americans deal with in 2024 due to racial trauma and oppression. Now, I would like to talk about a few different times within history just to justify reparations. Reparations is, like I said earlier, it's a real tricky conversation because no human being, black or white, today can comprehend the gravity of chattel slavery, the things that American slaves had to deal with on a day to day basis to survive, even the calculations that were done in some of the articles, they had stated that some scientists or some sociologists hypothesize anywhere from $17 billion to $70 trillion based off of inflation as well as minimum wage work. The fact that we are gauging slavery compared to minimum wage work is disrespectful. So no number in the world could ever even start to excuse me, could even no number could ever help us put that in a perspective. So for reparations to be responsible, there would have to be cash reparations as well as institutional reparations. But some different handicaps that Black Americans had to deal with through history outside of slavery was Jim Crow, blacks not being able to get particular jobs, live in certain areas, blacks not able to pursue their education, as well as establish equity within homes. The GI Bill during World War II that actually propelled white Americans out of the Great Depression never helped the Black Americans who fought and died within World War II. They were still restricted to the hood. They were not able to go and pursue their education or receive small businesses. All little different policies that are the reason why whites, family to family within America, are 10 times wealthier than Black American families. There's so many different examples. Outside of the GI Bill, you had what the welfare of the early 1930s. Farmers as well as domestic laborers were disincluded from social welfare systems. So while poor whites were receiving grants and were receiving social protections, black workers, a majority of black workers in America, were denied social welfare systems, ways that could have protected and fed their families. We also have discriminatory practices within the criminal justice system. We can talk about 100 to 1, the crack laws that gave Black Americans football numbers compared to their cocaine holding white counterparts, leaving Black mothers to raise Black children as well as survive within a capitalistic society. There's so many different examples to justify and strengthen what reparations would do to help Black Americans. But the sad part about it is, even if reparations were established within America, it would take the same amount of time for Black Americans as well as white Americans to adopt a healthier perspective of what integration and equality genuinely look like, because since we've never lived in a society that supports and protects equality, it would take generations to be able to see each other within a respective light. See, even compared to the reparations of the Native Americans, you have certain tribes that still have not taken their millions of dollars of reparations simply because they don't look at their just due in the perception of the dominant white society. The white man wants to fix all of their problems with the white man's money, not respecting the culture, the spirituality of a particular group of people. And like I said before, until there is a healthy respect and perception of both groups, not one form of reparation will ever be enough. Another example of why of Black Americans being disrespected, spat on, and disregarded was the popular saying of the 40 acres and a mule. Black Amer After the Civil War, previously enslaved families were they were promised they were promised captured Confederate land, particularly 40 acres, because 40,000 acres of Confederate land was seized by the Union. After the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the slave owner families were not just returned their lost land, but they were given reparations for destroyed and damaged properties. So these enslaved people that were promised land to establish community and to establish a way to survive within an American capitalist society, they were forced to become sharecroppers, doing the same work they were quote unquote freed from exploitative, and they were still being exploited. They could leave, but they couldn't. They could leave, but they couldn't.